Good afternoon and welcome to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting for the Board of County Commissioners. I'm Mark Jarrell. I have the honor of chairing this committee. I'm excited about today's agenda. Before we go through the overview of the agenda, I'd like my colleagues to introduce themselves. We'll start with District 6.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Rodriguez McDowell, elected by the people of District 6.
District 5.
Good afternoon, I'm Laura Meyer and I represent District 5.
All right, and District 2 Commissioner Vilma Leak is also a part of this committee and she is not here. I will turn it over to Derek Ramos, Deputy County Manager Derek Ramos, to do staff introductions and those in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Derek Ramos. I'm Deputy County Manager and Chief of Staff. I'll start with staff introductions and then we'll go around the room for our external guests.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you today on not environmental leadership or economic development, but intergovernmental. So it's a privilege to be here. Deputy County Manager Leslie Johnson.
Public Information Department.
I'm Rebecca Herbert, Community Relations Manager.
And Carly Godfrey, Senior Assistant to the County Manager.
Now we have several external guests with us. We'll start with David. Now we'll go down the list over here with Park and Recreation.
Hey, good afternoon. Bert Lynn, Capital Planning Division Director.
Larkin Eggleston, Concerned Citizen.
Greg Clemmer, Division Director, Park Operations.
Hello, Peter Cook, Deputy Director, Park and Recreation.
Good afternoon. Lee Jones, Director, Mecklenburg County Park and Rec.
Afternoon, Dennis LeCarry, Executive Director of Facilities Management for Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools.
Kip Kaiser, Concerned Citizen.
And Carly, just confirming, is there anyone online that needs to be recognized? Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. So just to kind of set the table for today's agenda, we've got two items on our agenda today. The first one is an overview of the state short session agenda and priorities. David Farrell is here, and also we'll have Representative Mary Belk, who leads our Mecklenburg County delegation, to come in and provide her perspective. So we will start off with David, but prior to that, the second part of today's discussion will be around fields and facilities joint use agreements. We do have Kip Kaiser, Concerned Citizen, but also Chair of the Park and Rec Commission. Of course, we have our illustrious Director, Lee Jones, with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec and his team, and my good brother, Dennis LeCarry, with CMS. So happy to have everyone in the room. And Larkin Eggleston, Commissioner of Park and Rec. So thank you for being here, sir, and former City Councilman. So David, I'm going to turn things over to you so we can get the overview of our state short session. And then when Representative Bell comes in, we'll let her jump right in.
Sounds good. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And when Representative Bell gets here, we can let her speak if she's ready. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to represent the county. I'm David Farrell, attorney and lobbyist with Maynard Nexon. Wanted to provide kind of a short session overview, also looking at some of the county's legislative goals and priorities and how they may fit into what the legislature we think may do this summer, and also kind of forecast the 2025 long session, which is a new session when new bills can be introduced. So to the extent we've got things on our agenda that may not be able to move forward this summer, we've got a new session starting in 2025. So we are in the second year of our two-year biennium. The legislature in the odd numbered years has a long session. It's a new session. Anything can be introduced. And the short session is more focused on kind of the budget tweaks, looking at the revenue projections, tweaking the two-year budget they passed last year, as well as passing legislation in most cases that have already started a discussion at the legislature. Either it was a bill that was introduced in 2023 or something they've studied in the off season. So our session begins actually next Wednesday. And there is no session or session limit. So there is no date by which they will adjourn. Right now, the discussion has been that they want to have a very fast, short session, a truly short session. And with the rumors right now are maybe a midsummer, like a mid-July type adjournment. Could be earlier, could be later. Last year, they, thought they would have a budget done much earlier, and then they had a 2-month kind of standstill while they worked through some highly controversial issues, ultimately then passed the budget in October. So it doesn't always go as planned. We'll have to wait and see how this session plays out. Some of the, focus again will be on the budget and the revenue issues. They're not expecting to have the same level of surplus that they've had in past sessions. So certainly there'll be some new money to spend, but a lot of it will be tweaking existing provisions in the budget with a goal of looking forward to 2025 and what funding they'll have at that point. Some of the things we've heard discussed so far that we think will be focus areas are, continuing to fund for Medicaid. There's education will be, we've heard they want to expand the opportunity scholarships that they passed last year. There will be some policy bills passed. What we're hearing right now is that there may be a joint effort between the House and Senate budget chairs to put the budget together in more of the conference process instead of the long session process where you have a bill that starts in one chamber, goes to the other and comes back. They want to get done quickly. So that doesn't lend itself to that 3 or 4 month process. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But again, we won't know till we see it unveiled, but that's the current discussion. So I expect there'll be some policy in the budget like there has been over the last, however many sessions. There was a period of time where there wasn't very much policy in the budget. Now we're back to having policy in the budget as a way to get things done. So just kind of talking about the environment that we're in right now, as you probably know, we've got both a House and Senate that's controlled by Republicans and it's supermajority. So they won't necessarily need the governor's signature on any bill in order to pass that legislation, assuming all the votes, 72 in the House, 30 in the Senate vote together. Again, that's what we expect to happen this summer. We'll have to wait and see, but we expect that whatever the priorities are for this Republican leadership, we'll be able to move forward without necessarily the concern about the governor's veto. Again, as I mentioned, short sessions are usually fairly quick and focused. This is even more so this year because it's an election year. So the more time they spend in Raleigh, the less time they're in their districts campaigning. So that will also be a factor that I think will lead to a short session. Again, there could be some high profile controversial issues that delay the negotiations. If one chamber wants to make that happen, the other chamber doesn't. There might be some negotiations that delays things, but right now there seems to be uniform discussion of trying to get a budget done in June, and certainly by the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. As we look forward to the session, when you've got that quick session, can cut two ways. Either it means that if something's controversial, it might not move forward, which depending on your perspective on the issue could be good. So that's maybe a positive. The negative is if something does get any controversy to it, that might mean it is more likely not to move this summer in this short session. It would have to hold over to the 2025 session when new bills can be introduced and they'll have plenty of time to kind of debate policy and things of that sort. So looking at kind of as it applies to our county and the priorities we have, again, to the extent we've got priorities like funding for education, other things that we share kind of uniformly with the leadership, those are things that I would see moving forward this session. We'll also continue to have the opportunity this session to build on some of the relationships we have in partnerships with other local communities, whether it's the city of Charlotte, whether it's the Charlotte Business Alliance, other local governments around us, other counties around us, where we have shared alignments and priorities. Obviously, the challenge you have in a session like this is if we've got something that is either a new idea or something that is not uniformly accepted at the legislature right now, it's probably unlikely, given the short session, that they're going to have the time to go through and debate and negotiate certain priorities that we may have or any other group may have. Just looking at a couple of things that are on your legislative priority list and trying to relate them to the current legislature. The legislature every year funds education at a very large clip and usually increases that funding. And so we certainly would expect that to continue this year. Obviously, the Republican leadership will decide what parts of education they want to fund, but there will be more money for education. There typically are raises for teachers as well. So, again, I would expect that to be in the mix for discussions this year. One of the things on the list is the child care stabilization, funding for child care. That certainly got a lot of attention this year. We actually checked in with Representative Willis of Union County prior to this meeting. He is in the early education business, knows that industry well. And it sounds like there's certainly going to be some initiatives for the long session next year, but given the short time frame of this summer session, that there may be some funding, but there's unlikely to be kind of some wholesale changes or programs that have not already been discussed. But it is an issue that Representative Willis and others in the Republican leadership have on their list of things to look at. It's certainly a workforce issue, and they've recognized that. So as they work on workforce development, we've got to have that child care piece that goes with it. And that seemed to be something that's recognized in Raleigh right now. On the Health and Human Services side, again, they continue to look at the Housing Trust Fund and, again, Workforce Housing Loan Program are two things that have been created at the legislative level and will be funded. On the immigration issue, what we're hearing is that fairly quickly in session, the Senate will take up the bill that deals with sheriff's offices cooperating with ICE for detainees. That's certainly been a controversial issue. I believe in past sessions, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff has spoken out against that provision. The governor has vetoed earlier versions of that bill. But again, it's expected, everything we're hearing and seeing is that that bill, which was a House bill that passed the House last year, but the Senate did not move it last year, has been discussed as a bill that will move in this short session. Also looking at community violence and public safety issues, certainly there's always a view on law enforcement, courts, et cetera. The JPS, Justice and Public Safety Committee, not only looks at funding for these areas, but also looks at policy. One of the issues that we've heard that is getting some discussion is this issue of regulating hemp-derived consumables and kratom, if I'm saying that right. Apparently, there's products that you can buy at convenience stores that have these types of substances on them, and children are getting them, bringing them to schools, and it's causing a lot of issues in schools and in the community. And so there was a House bill last year that did pass the House that regulated these items. What I've heard most recently is that the Senate is going to move a bill that doesn't necessarily look like the House bill, but it gets at that problem. And so again, I'm hearing that they're going to try to tackle that issue. Certainly something that has led to a lot of community and school issues across the state. Talking about a couple other health and human services issues. Obviously, we've just had Medicaid expansion. And so the agency, DHHS, will be talking to the legislature about any tweaks that might be needed in that area. They've also looked at some funding for these qualified community health centers. Again, trying to leverage this funding from the feds that we could lose if we don't use. Excuse me. So they're continuing to look at those issues. Behavioral health is another area that's gotten a lot of attention from this legislature, both in funding and in programs, services to the mental health, behavioral health. And so we think there'll be some funding in the budget in these areas as well. Again, they're still working out how much and where it would go, but these are areas that are important to Mecklenburg County that we see funding in these areas, and we believe that they'll also be funded at the state level. Again, finally, looking at early childhood development, there are efforts underway, particularly led by the Partnership for Children, focusing on these areas that certainly would expect to see some state funding in that area as well. Looking at community and workforce development, one of the items on our list is dealing with funding and issues related to orphan roads. There was a bill introduced in the House, it's House Bill 733 that dealt with that and provided some funding for DOT to address that issue. It's unclear whether this will be included in the 2025 budget or any legislation. There's a NCDOT agency bill, I think it's House Bill 198 that passed the House. It's in the Senate. The Senate and House Transportation chairs are meeting next week to figure out what's going to go in that bill. So we'll certainly check in with them to find out whether DOT supports this orphan roads program. My guess is they'll need some funding for that, so that ties it into the budget. So we'll have to see how that issue plays out. If not, it's certainly something that we will push for in 2025. Since we weren't representing the county last year, this is not a bill that we worked on specifically or that we know where the bodies are buried on that one or who's concerned about it. But typically, you know, a bill like that needs funding for DOT. So whether or not that rose to the level of getting their priorities is, you know, something that we can determine. Another important issue for the county is the issue of digital inclusion and making sure we have broadband, not only to all parts of our county, but it's important for the state to push broadband out to the rural parts of the state. There has consistently been funding provided for in the budget for these efforts. It started with the GREAT Grant program, I think in 2018, and has continued to grow. Particularly, I think North Carolina was one of the leading states to actually put a program together with counties to use the federal funds that came during COVID to try to help expand this, particularly when people were at home and not able to go to school or go to work. We need to be able to provide for these mobile resources and people need to be able to connect. And so that's been a priority for our state. In fact, there was a IT Information Technology Oversight Committee this morning that I attended before I drove here, where DIT provided an update to the legislature about the grant programs and how much money they're pushing out. There's also a BEAD program, which is basically broadband equity is in the title of that program. There's $1.5 billion in that program through ARPA grants and other things to move that money out across the state. So it was reported at this meeting that North Carolina is really a leader and other states are modeling their programs after what we've done here. So there's still plenty of work to be done, but North Carolina is tackling this problem and making some progress in that regard. Another area that in workforce development that's important is the North Carolina's created this North Carolina Community College Short-Term Workforce Development Grant program, which again is trying to focus on careers where four-year college degree is not necessary. Plenty of companies and jobs focus on certain skills that the community colleges are great for training for. So they're focused on trying to continue to support community colleges through these grant programs. Again, something else that's important for Mecklenburg County. Looking at the judicial system, you know, there's certainly been a discussion among a lot of clerks' offices, Mecklenburg included, about the changeover in the e-courts process with the Odyssey program and whether or not we're sufficiently staffed to manage the additional workload that's bringing for staff having to deal with managing the e-court system. About maybe 3 weeks ago, there was a Justice and Public Safety Oversight Committee meeting where your Mecklenburg County DA spoke and did a great job outlining the problems and issues that Mecklenburg has found in their implementation, as well as they heard from some clerks as well that have you know seen some difficulties in implementing this in the counties where it's been rolled out. So I haven't seen a specific ask yet for additional funding, particularly in the DA's request. I don't think they had any additional funding requests. The clerks outlined a need for additional staffing. Whether or not it gets funded in the budget is still part of the what's being discussed. So I don't know whether counties will get additional funds for staffing, but that's certainly on the list for the Justice and Public Safety chairs to take a look at. And that's, I guess you'd call more of a short-term need. I think what I heard from the clerk's presentation is that there's been needs across the state for additional clerk positions with or without e-courts. And so, again, that's probably more of a long session issue than a short session issue. Finally, we'll talk about the environmental initiatives and some of the environmental items on the county's priority list. The legislature continues to fund infrastructure for water, sewer, stormwater. I believe they appropriated $2 billion last year that went to local governments and local projects. Certainly expect to see more of that this summer, but not at that same funding level, given that we're not in a long session without the same kind of surplus in revenue. But they'll continue to fund that. One of the items I think on the list was whether there'd be any changes in the standards, and we're certainly not anticipating there to be substantive changes to the program this summer. Could be funding money, but not necessarily policy changes. Multimodal is another item on the list. I'd say what I've seen in the last session on that and what's been discussed maybe for this summer is not as much, rail or things of that sort, but they certainly have funded greenways and trails and things of that sort. So they set up a new program in parks called the Great Trails State Grant Program and appropriated $25 million to it. And it's for communities that have projects, including paved trails. So it's not just natural trails, it's paved trails are included. There's some federal money that we can match on paved trails. And so they wanted to make sure that they put enough money in it that got this program started. The long-term goal is to come up with a recurring stream of money for this. So 25 million, 12.5 last year, 12.5 in this year's budget or this year's allocation is what's in the program now. And my understanding is that they've had plenty of applications and most of that money has already been spoken for in grants that have been awarded. And so the goal is to show projects being built on the ground in communities that then will kind of serve as the impetus to fund that program more going forward. One interesting concept that's starting to get some discussion that's been around for a while under the environmental concerns is a CPACE program, which essentially is a bill. I think it's been introduced the last 4 or 5 sessions to essentially create a funding mechanism, almost like a special taxing district, to fund, at the first iteration of it was to fund renewable energy projects. So basically solar panels on people's houses, but they've expanded it, as you see there, to water conservation, renewable energy, resiliency improvements, kind of a longer list of things that the money could be used for in order to give property owners the ability to kind of finance these. It's certainly not without some controversy and concern. They basically set up taxing districts that would provide liens on property. And the discussion is what priority do those liens have against your mortgage or other liens? It almost acts like a tax lien, but usually only governments have the authority to tax. So there's some concern there that I think that the proponents are trying to work out. But just in the last 2 weeks, I've heard that there are some on the Senate side that want to take a look at this and see if it's something that can move forward. It has not had a hearing in committee in probably 6 or 8 years that I can recall. So I'm not sure if that's one that can get worked out by this summer or whether that's a long session issue. Again, I'd mentioned the transportation, green infrastructure, the trails efforts that have been made, not only with the new program, but I believe they funded $5 million for the Complete the Trail program, which communities can use to link trails to try to link communities across the state. And then finally, the PFAS has been an environmental issue that has been more recognized in the eastern part of the state around Wilmington and Fayetteville, but they continue to look at these items, particularly through the UNC Collaborative at Chapel Hill receives money to do testing across the state on different environmental issues, including PFAS. So again, not sure that's really an issue that is hit here locally, but it's certainly one that's gotten some attention at the legislature. With that, I'll conclude and pause for any questions, or certainly glad to expand on any of the topics that we've covered.
Yeah, thank you. David, great presentation. I suspect there'll be some questions and comments from this, and we'll start with Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell.
Well, that was really depressing. Thank you for your presentation, but literally I'm sitting here going, this is so frustrating, and I just don't have anything good to say. Literally, I don't. I kind of feel like we got an update on how bad things are and how our priorities just don't align with our state's priorities. So I don't have anything brilliant to say. Sorry. Pass.
I have a question. Under education priorities, it says education funding is set to increase, continuing the trend from the previous year. But is it true that more money is going to vouchers without income requirement?
I can't speak to the details of what the increase will be. My understanding generally is that the legislature has a favorable view right now of opportunity scholarships and will continue to fund that. As far as what the criteria or the details or whether that's going to be tweaked from what was passed last year, I have not heard that they're making a change on that, but it's not something that I'm aware of.
I'm just curious, when it's set to increase, if the money's going to where we want it to go.
It's not.
Understood. I think what we would generally expect is for education spending to continue to increase. And it's been increasing every year. And again, it might not be going to certain places where we would want it to go or others. But they are spending money on education. I don't believe the only increased spending will be in the opportunity scholarship area. I think there'll be other areas as well. Again, these are, negotiations that are going on between the House and Senate leadership and budget writers. So we don't have a sneak peek yet on what that would look like. We're just trying to highlight here that we have continued to see increase in spending and by certain percentages. And so we would expect that to continue. And again, we're hearing that one of the areas will be the opportunity scholarship area.
I do want to say there is some good. Behavioral health, there is more awareness of mental health. And I have heard, not just here, not today, I have heard that there is more talk than ever before in Raleigh about mental health funding. So I think that is actually a plus, the bright side, trying to find the bright side. And also early childhood development and childcare. I think there is more talk about that too. So I'm going to end on a positive note. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. David, a couple of things. One, I think this is really, really useful to go bullet by bullet to help us understand exactly what the reality is with respect to the priorities and what we put on the legislative agenda. I think we realize that it's an uphill battle, and I think you teed it up perfectly by framing up what the makeup of the General Assembly is. And so with that understanding, letting us know exactly where we are is helpful. To that end, I think the first question I would have, understanding the makeup of the General Assembly and our priorities, what's the strategy in trying to get some of our priorities across the finish line?
Sure. So a couple things. One is identifying those who can be allies for us in the legislature on issues. And there are things that, might be viewed as bipartisan or, whatever the right words are to say, we'll use early childhood. I mean, we might have a certain goal in funding. They might have a slightly different goal, but we do want to make some headway on that area. So looking at things like that we can partner on is good. The other thing too is if we've got items that are kind of regional items, I mean, I think it continues to make sense for us to look at our neighbors who would share similar goals and kind of try to have, unified voices on certain things. There are also, again, we're new to the process, so learning you guys as well. If there are specific things for Mecklenburg County that might not be the same in other counties, or there's a particular initiative we have, those are things that we can define and then try to find places where they fit in the current structure of the leadership. We talked about on early childhood, you've got Representative David Willis, who's not in Mecklenburg County, but he's right next door.
That's right.
He shares possibly the same goals y'all do on those issues. And so finding where our synergies can be will be helpful. And obviously we'll have to work through our delegation to find where they have found successful partnerships. Like, who do they go to on the leadership Republican side if they have something that they want to get done? I mean, these are relationships that we'll need to learn as we move forward in representing the county. But again, across the state, not every client aligns with the current leadership. Not every one of our agenda items may align.
Right.
And so sometimes it takes educating and trying to change the minds of some folks on certain things. There may be things like opportunity scholarships that we're not gonna agree on from a policy standpoint, but we're not in a position to really change minds on that necessarily.
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's almost, I would almost say it's probably issue by issue as far as how we attack each issue and where we find our synergies and who our advocates can be, or partners or team members, if you will.
Right. So one, I like the idea of regionalism. I think that's really important because I think when you look at our footprint, there are common threads that we all share. Whether you're Iredell, Union, Gaston, Mecklenburg, Cabarrus. So certainly attacking it that way and seeing what the commonalities are, I think is really important, because I do think when we have conversations with colleagues who maybe, have a different party affiliation, we find that there's more commonality around thought, particularly around specific issues. So I really like that approach and appreciate that. When I look at an issue like orphan roads, I've talked to colleagues across the state. That's something that we're all, from a county commission standpoint, trying to deal with. And that's, again, I think identifying the low-hanging fruit for us, I think would be very, very helpful. And seeing, okay, hey, commissioners, here's where there seems to be a lot of common ground.
Right.
Around these issues. We really feel like we can, there's a big push around these issues and helping us prioritize to know which ones we think we can pick off and
right.
which ones are going to be more difficult. I would tee that up. The other thing that I want to get a better understanding, and for the public to understand, we talk on our level, and particularly in our county, about equity. When the state is looking at funding, help me understand, do they look at and they say, we've got $25 million. Is it proportional when they look at their distribution, or do they just apply and it's 100 counties, we take 100, divide that 25 million by 100 counties, or do they look at it proportionally based on size or other factors?
I'm not sure there's a perfect answer to that question. I think it depends on the situation. I mean, I think it's probably stated the obvious to say that, those who are in leadership, who are making the budget decisions, are in a position to kind of decide what the priorities are. Again, stating the obvious there. In my experience, a lot of times it's what are the asks? So like, for instance, a county has a set of financial requests and those go in. Typically what happens is you're asked to prioritize those. And so obviously Mecklenburg County is going to have a larger list than Martin County or, Far West County. And so, and sometimes they might look at a request and say, well, whatever number 4, we just don't usually fund that. We're not going to fund those, whatever that is. And then, whether you've got, a need in your courts or whether you need more, and then you also have the issue of it comes out of different pots of money. So, if you need more clerks or DAs, that comes out of a certain pot of money. If you need money for water, sewer and infrastructure, that can come out of another pot of money, including the SCIF, the State Capital Infrastructure Fund, which is a relatively new funding mechanism for those kind of projects. So I don't believe that they're currently set up and treating it on a pro rata basis based on size. I think it's and a lot of times it's up to each local delegation to make the case for whatever that is.
Okay.
Which is why in some cases, like the current makeup of the legislature and our delegation is we don't have people kind of sitting at that budget table when they're cutting up the pie at the very end. We certainly have people that have access, can put their requests in. And so to the extent, we've got regional issues, for instance, we can partner with some of our neighboring communities that do or may have somebody sitting at the table. That can be helpful. But I think we have to sell our priorities from a funding mechanism against limited pot of money, this many requests. How do they decide how to spend it? And you've got to make the case. And a lot of times, try to find a legislator who will agree with us and champion that and be willing to go to bat for it.
Got it. So the last point that I wanted to bring up, and this is more for staff, and I don't know, Leslie, you brought up something that really piqued my curiosity. You talked about the Great Trails fund, I think it was called, but or a special fund. Was that something because that comes with matching federal dollars, you said?
Well, the only piece of it that's got federal matching dollars, is my understanding, is the paved trail piece of this. I mean, the program is there for a community to make an application for any type of trail. It's a natural surface, paved, canoe trail, whatever it is, river trail, whatever they call those, horse trail. And then it's administered through parks, state parks division. So it's only, as my understanding, it's the paved trail piece that has the ability to pull down some federal matching dollars, and I forget the exact match.
Understood. I was just curious because we have staff in the room. I was just curious, were we aware of any of that and taking advantage of it?
I'd say yes, but I'm gonna let Bert.
Yeah,
he's
that'd be
jumped
great.
up.
Hello, good
Hey.
afternoon. So we did not apply for the Great Trail State money, but we have, I'm gonna say 6 or 7 projects currently funded now, where we do take advantage of the federal transportation dollars that are administered through CRTPO.
Okay.
So some projects that are currently under construction right now, some that are wrapping up, and then some that are coming up. I think there are 2 of the Greenway projects that we reviewed for the FY29 CIP last week have some federal dollars attached to it right now.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Meyer.
While you're sitting here, so the 25 million for trails and 5 million for complete the trail, that's really nothing. But is that those are state parks, or does that come to county at all?
Counties and towns are eligible within North Carolina.
Okay.
The Great Trail State just wrapped up kind of a statewide plan. They have a route that kind of goes through the state. There's a portion of it that goes through the east side of Mecklenburg County. And so basically those entities that are in those areas are eligible. I think you have to be within 6 miles or something like that of the corridor. And so we're paying attention to it and seeing what might align with their funding and kind of our project priority needs. But it is something that we're definitely aware of.
That's awesome. Commissioner Rodriguez, we go.
Can you say again, which was the one we have not applied for?
The Great Trail State, it's the newer money. If the funding for the paved trails, if I understand it, are federal dollars, then those are being most likely lumped in with the other federal dollars that are distributed through CRTPO. So it's federal dollars that come through the state that then go through the transportation organizations across the state.
Okay, I guess what I want to understand is, if you look at $25 million, literally that's a drop in the bucket for our projects. I mean, we all know that. So I'm trying to understand, why would we not be applying for some things that we might qualify for? Or are you saying we don't qualify?
I'm not sure that we qualify for some or all of that money.
Okay.
But I believe the thought process behind starting with some funding is trying to find some quick win projects across the state, turning those around, using those as successes to then lobby for additional dollars in the future. And so it may be those future dollars, and they may start to expand the eligibility for some of that money that would allow us to go and apply for it.
Okay, I guess I'm still not clear on, is it that we are trying not to compete for monies that maybe it would be beneficial to another area more than it would to us, or help me understand? 'Cause I'm still not
and
getting
Bert can clean it up after I try to jump in.
Okay.
Okay, right. So as you referenced, they have a master plan of where they're trying to have trails go throughout the state. And you have to be within a close proximity for your trail to be part of that segment, right? And right now, how it's planned, even though there's stuff that may eventually be eligible in the east, right now, as I'm understanding it, we don't have anything that's an immediate connect that makes us eligible to apply for the money.
Okay, okay,
But what the staff is keeping a watchful eye on it so that if it is an opportunity, then they will apply.
okay. Thank you, that helped a lot. But I do think like 25 million is like literally not very much money. So in this space.
Break it up.
So, yeah, like I'm just thinking.
100,000.
Yeah, like, what are they trying to do with that money? Anyways, okay. I'm sorry that I was so negative earlier, but this kind of thing is just, it's just so, disheartening, you know? The orphan roads thing, it's continued advocacy is essential, but do we really feel like it just doesn't feel like there's a snowball's chance for our priorities like that. So I don't know. How do you do this kind of work if we're just, I mean, I feel like we're banging our heads up against the wall here. So.
You're not volunteering, are you?
You, I mean, it's just like anything. Sometimes you have successes, sometimes you don't, and you don't always enjoy the reasons why something doesn't succeed. But it's one of those processes where I think what we hope to be able to do is to continue to try to strategize and put us in the best position to succeed on what we can exceed on. We recognize that, so much of what happens in the state is governed by whoever's in charge. And so that can be good or bad depending on your perspective. And so on some of our issues, I think, there is going to be some alignment, and we'll have to figure out how to maximize our ability to succeed on certain items. And there's certain things that we may not agree on from a policy or philosophical area. And there's only so much you can do in that situation. I mean, we can try to be creative. We can find ways to partner and try to work around things, but ultimately, we're going to continue to try to put the county's policies and priorities out there and be successful where we can.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. The final thing, just to wrap this up, again, thank you. But one of the things I do think is important, sometimes, we're going for a grand slam and a single will do. And so to get visibility around, maybe if there needs to be language tweaks where we can get partially towards the goal, and we can always hand off to someone else to take us a little bit further down the field. So, I mean, I'm certainly open to those types of options. I mean, we need to approach this with a sober understanding of the constraints that we're faced. So if you see an item on this agenda that you say, hey, listen, the 2/3 of this, it's really a futile exercise, but this portion of it is doable. I hope we get that level of visibility so that, again, we can hit a single.
Sure.
And somebody else can come in and hit a home run later on down the line. So I do want to tee that up to make sure at least we can have that discussion among board members to figure out how we'd like to approach it once we have that information.
Sure. Well, that's something I think we can work on maybe this fall as we put together the county's 2025 legislative priority list, and working with Derek and in this committee, we can certainly try to take that very approach and see where we can get some wins.
Yeah, because we can have a living document with us that has, all of our desires, right? But then what we're really working
Here's the list, yeah.
towards, So,
Makes sense.
okay. Well, thank you for that. Does anybody else, everybody good? All right, well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Really, really appreciate that.
Sure, appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, David.
All right, we're going to transition in our second panel. So please come up to the chairs, please. Find a mic if you can. There's other chairs over here as well if it's too crowded over there.
Hey, Kip and Larkin, will you guys just come on up as well, please? Dennis, you're up too.
The most important.
Wando.
That's my high school. Wando. Wando? Mhm.
Who's on that?
Me. That's my high school.
Oh, Wando.
I have all kinds of nicknames around here.
Yeah.
Hey, Mary. Gotten in some really true.
All right, so while we're teeing this up, again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I think this is a really important discussion that we're about to have. Just to give people some background, some of us attended the Park and Rec Commission meeting where the chairman talked about some of the issues that the community was facing with respect to field use and capacity. And one of the things that we thought it would be good would, number one, understand how we work with CMS, because there are a ton of fields on that side and different spaces for community use. What does that look like, and how should we approach it? Are there any actions that we need to take and tee up to our board? So this is really a fact-finding informational session to gather information, and then we'll ask some questions after that. So I think, Mr. Director, are you up first?
Mr. Kaiser.
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Mr. Kaiser's up first.
All right.
We had some meetings with our joint planning committee at Park and Rec, and Larkin was in there. I think it kind of started with the planning for the CIP. And there's a number of items that cost a lot of money, and there's a big need for more playing fields, more use of facilities in both the schools, CMS, and Park and Rec, or the county owns property. They also have control over different facilities, and we thought that we may be needed to encourage more cooperation, more joint use. And even though we were told that there is cooperation, maybe it's not as good as it could be. And so our intent was to act as a catalyst to increase that participation and coordination. And Larkin was instrumental in that. He knew all the players and I didn't. And so we all had them, we scheduled a meeting prior to this to discuss it, to see if we could get some more buy-in, and plus you guys can make it happen. We were told that there's some attorneys that might be involved, and when I hear that, I know that that means time drags on. So I guess the best point is we're acting as a catalyst to make sure that y'all know that they're trying to work together and that there is some positive results, and y'all can help make that happen.
I will turn to Director Jones.
Thank you, Derek. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Commissioner Kaiser, for your words. We've been involved in joint use agreements for a long time. When I came here in 2004, that was one of my first assignments. And we have some joint use agreements that are still going on with CMS that have existed since 1995. And I remember those early days when I would meet with a guy named Harold Jenkins, another one named Mike Rabel, a real estate coordinator named Susan DeSoto, and then this fiery guy named Dennis Lacaria. And we would meet on a monthly basis, and we would sit down and talk about opportunities. Park and Recreation at the time of my arrival had been, had a lot of forethought in thinking about acquiring additional property to be able to land bank and plan for the growth that we were starting to experience then. And I was a newbie to the county, and it was taking all that information in. And we've tried to do that over the years, even to the point that we would meet with the county attorney, we would meet with CMS's attorney to make sure that we were moving these things forward. But it was a very difficult thing to do because of the requirements, legal requirements that limit some of the things that CMS can do and some of the things that we can do. As we look at now where we are in Mecklenburg County and how we've grown and the desire for additional fields, it's not just about where the field, it's not just about the number of fields, it's about proximity and ease of access. And we feel that by working more closely with Charlotte Mecklenburg schools and other partners, we'd be able to increase the accessibility of these fields for our users and try to meet those recreational requirements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to our Capital Planning Division Director, Bert Lynn, and he's going to go through a presentation as it relates to what we've been trying to do with CMS. And then just give you an update of some of these aspirational goals and needs. And another thing that I want to mention is that we used to meet with the Citizen Capital Budget Advisory Committee, and that's been revised. And one of the driving points from that group used to be that if Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, and the library system would partner for joint use, that would look more favorable in terms of our budget ask. And we've always followed that guideline. I just wanted to put that in for a bit of context. I'm gonna stop being verbose and I'm gonna hand it over to Bert Lynn.
Thank you, Lee. So what I wanted to do is give everybody kind of an overview of the state of our joint use agreements between Park and Recreation and CMS. Tell you a little bit about kind of our ongoing coordination with our capital planning teams, and then some of the bigger picture, longer range things that we've talked about in terms of possibilities of partnership moving into the future. So currently, the way that our joint use and lease agreements exist are for specific locations. So we'll have one agreement that has a sunrise and a sunset date for that specific location. We've got those types of agreements for 23 sites across the county right now. Some of those are outdoor facilities for use of sports fields and things of that nature, like Pineville Elementary here down in Pineville. Some of those are for indoor facilities. Some include both. Berwick is a really good example where we have kind of an indoor recreation site where the gym space is used for PE during school hours, and it's used for programmatic standpoint, from a recreation standpoint, after hours on weekends and in the summers. We also continue our kind of monthly coordination meetings between our Park and Recreation staff and CMS staff. And we talk about a number of things. We talk about active projects that we have going on, upcoming projects. We've had a lot of coordination over the last 2 years on the various capital improvement plan projects that we've had on both sides. Potential partnerships, including in some cases, partnering together to acquire land. So that's kind of in those coordination meetings a couple of years ago, we had a rash of our joint use and lease agreements come up for renewal. And so we started thinking, okay, how can we make this easier for ourselves and our future selves in our roles moving down the line? And so the idea that we came up with was developing a singular agreement between the leadership of the county and Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools that would be an umbrella agreement that would include all of these shared use sites that we currently have, and should make it easier to add new sites in the future. So CMS is currently working through that draft agreement now. I think that was the allusion to lawyers that Kit made a little bit earlier. I think they're working on like second or third draft at this point. So our hope is in the near future that we'll have a draft that the county will be able to review, and that's something that we can kind of work together and set into motion in the near future. somewhat independent of that. But still based on Park and Recreation's need for additional active recreation space. Specifically, I think track space is what we were looking at a couple of years ago. Some athletic director staff at CMS reached out to the county and said, hey, would you guys be interested in partnering in some of our middle school sites? And middle school sites are a sweet spot for us and for CMS because they're used for middle school sports, but they're not overly programmed like a lot of high school facilities are. High school facilities, they utilize those facilities quite a bit more than they do on middle school sites. And so the idea being there that if the county were able to go in and invest in a capital way in improving and renovating those facilities, we would actually be spending less money to renovate an existing facility than to go and develop a brand new undeveloped kind of green site for kind of the same program. And so as part of that kind of conversation, we went and assessed 45 middle school sites, and we identified 18 sites that we thought had promise. And the different things that we looked at there were the mix of facilities that they have, the proximity of the parking lots to those facilities, the possibility of expansion, and then the locations of those sites within the county in relation to our priority communities and our gap areas. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, you pretty much summed it up. I mean, we met with Erica Turner. She actually approached me and saying, hey, what can you guys do to potentially help us? I know we all know our middle school fields are not at the same level as the other facilities at CMS as far as the high school fields. And the high school fields have a different, they just have more resources with the athletic director, where our middle schools just don't have the booster clubs, not kind of keep everything at that high level. And so we looked at that as an opportunity that most middle school sports are done like at 6 o'clock at night. Well, we also see that our needs are potentially between that sweet spot of 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And then we also understand and see that when I asked Bert to kind of look and do an assessment of it, is that when he did a complete assessment and then how he identified the 18 sites based on our prioritization, it also started kind of line a little bit some of these facilities into areas where we're just overcrowded in those areas also. So overall, at the end of the day, it kind of made sense a little bit because just like he said, you know, you have a site that's already developed, it just needs to be kind of remodeled a little bit, you know, and touched up. And then, you know, the weekends, a lot of those facilities are just, there's nothing going on. Weekdays after 6 p.m., nothing's going on, versus a high school facility where there's multiple different things going on. And those facilities, they don't like you to really go in there and do too much. The ADs have controls of those. So that's kind of how it really started. And we did have a meeting. We met with Erica Turner. Our team here, we kind of met with them. We had a couple of the ADs from CMS, from high schools down to a couple of middle school ADs, and had a great conversation. Dennis was there, and just kind of started looking at it and assessing it, and it seemed like everybody was was very promising.
Yep.
So that we did that a couple
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yep.
And so, and that's kind of where we left it there, from there. So I'll let you keep going.
Yep,
But that's-
absolutely. Yeah, so moving kind of away from kind of active sports facilities into access to public open space. You guys are well aware, we've been very bullish on land acquisition over the last 3 to 4 years in an effort to improve access to public open space across the county. Even with those efforts, you know, we still have needs, and in some cases, there aren't lands available for what we would be looking for, where we still have a gap in access. And so we started to look at, you know, potentially partnering with CMS at elementary school sites and activating a portion of their sites for public use kind of after school hours on weekends and during the summers. So very similarly, we went and identified kind of 33 elementary school campuses across the county. Granted, this was done probably 4 or so years ago, so it's a little bit older, and it was completed before we completed Playbook with some of the identifiers. So probably makes sense for us to go back and kind of renew that. But the idea being very similar to some bond projects decades ago where school parks were built together at the same time. Is being able to go and identify sites where we have need for public open space and schools kind of exist in those areas, and there's room on those campuses to potentially go and include some additional park amenities there. Beyond that, we're starting to look kind of in the not so distant future and the distant future in terms of locations where we have property or potentially CMS have property, and the other entity has a need kind of within that area. And so the potential of swapping land, one site for another, of course, the recreation and the park and recreation outlook of that is we would definitely want to be acre positive. We don't want to lose or reduce acres. And if there's a possibility to swap any lands and increase our coverage, kind of not only in that one site, but in other sites kind of around the county, it may be something to at least consider and see if there are ways that benefit both CMS and the county in those instances. So that's just a really brief kind of overview of what we've kind of talked through. I think it probably makes sense to open things up to Dennis to talk through things a little bit from a CMS perspective.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks, commissioners, for allowing me to be here today. So I think I feel like everybody feels like I've been around for a very, very long time, but I've only been back as a CMS employee since April 1st last year. So I'm just another year back as a CMS employee. And so during that time, we did reorganize. And so now all of the joint use and the extended use and community use is under me. And I think that that's sort of one important aspect to all of this is that we have a lot of different uses and a lot of different users. We've got 24, we will have with Knights View being open 24 joint use facilities with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec, but we have 45 total. So the town of Pineville, the town of Cornelius, so other entities that have joint use agreements with us, other entities that the county supports, like the library system, for example, down at Southwest Middle School, we've got a library there. We used to have a library at Philip O'Berry that the library pulled out of during the recession. So that there are other joint use agreements throughout the county, not just with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec. And the key to it being a joint use agreement is that is based on a shared capital investment. So that's what classifies it as a joint use, is both parties are putting some amount of money into the pot to develop the facility, whatever that looks like, however that looks like on a site-by-site basis. And then that creates the opportunity for, if it's a county site and we're jointly developing it, they've got the priority scheduling, we're next in line. If it's a CMS site and we're jointly developing it, CMS has the priority scheduling, Park and Rec is the next in line. But then beyond that, we also offer our sites up to the community at large. So there were about 30,000 hours of community use events in the 2023 calendar year, and about 3 hours of events. There were 9,700 or so events that were booked under community use on our site. So after our priority scheduling, our priority partners, the hours that are left are also made available to the community at large. And some of those are athletic groups. Some of those are, other education providers. Some of those are churches who meet in our schools on Sunday. So there's a variety of different users. And then there's another set aside it's called an extended use agreement. And so that's in a place where we have an athletics partner most typically. So somebody like South Park Baseball or somebody like that makes an investment in our fields, and they agree to operate and maintain those fields so that we don't have that expense. And then they get the priority scheduling after the school use in return for them taking on the maintenance piece. Unlike the way Park and Rec operates, the Board of Education policy is that the community use, so separate and apart from the joint use and the extended use, the community use is supposed to be zero sum. So all we're supposed to do is generate enough revenue to cover the cost of the custodians who open and close the facility, the software that helps us process and captures the payment and all of those sorts of things. There are those sorts of tiers of use that are available to users throughout the county so that it's not simply one flavor of use at each one of our sites. And those agreements, as I said, sort of vary based on what the facility is, where it is, who made an investment, how they're making that investment. And if they're just somebody who just shows up once a week to use our building and leaves, it's a totally different thing. But they don't get to do that if our joint use partner is using the building. So just understanding how all of that sort of works. We also do an awful lot with the county in things like greenways that I think are separate apart from this. But I mean, when we built the Esperanza site and this commission gave us the money to go ahead and acquire that school site over there on Farm Pond Lane and build that school, we dedicated land at the back for a greenway. As we built Valentine Ridge High School, we identified a greenway trail and network that would connect to the sidewalks and multi-use path and the roads there, so that the community has another asset. So that's something that we're always looking at. I think the middle school sites are a huge opportunity for us for a lot of reasons. Some of those that were touched on here is that we don't light our athletic fields at the middle schools. When it's dark, they're done playing, regardless of whether it's the second quarter or the fourth quarter. So there's opportunities for people to make additional investments for infrastructure and those sorts of things. The other reality is our middle school sports are 100% subsidized by the participation fees from our high school athletes. There is no additional funding that's available to us to operate our middle school sports program. And if you're a free or reduced lunch student, you are paying zero to a reduced sports participation fee as well. So when you look at the total pool of resources available to support our middle school athletics themselves, it's being funded by our high school athletics in essence. And, you know, the maintenance dollars that we have don't go as far. So as we're working through this new master agreement, we're also looking at the things that each of us do better than the other. So, you know, saying that if it's on or in a building, CMS is going to take on the responsibility to operate and maintain that thing. So if the air conditioning goes out, it's a CMS issue. If there's a problem with the field or the field lighting, we've got experts who do that. So that would be a park and rec sort of maintenance responsibility. So we're organizing all of the sites sort of in tranches according to whose land is it on, who invested what, and how do we manage those sites based on that. So we're actively working through that to be able to come up with one umbrella agreement with no sunset, because we all agree there's no intent that these things ever should have expired. And just because something was written in 1995 with an expiry of 40 years or whatever, that there's no reason to walk away from a working partnership. I think the other thing that was mentioned too is we're working through site redevelopments. Like historically Briarwood, we had to build the school on a piece of the park because there was nowhere else to do that and not disrupt the operations of the school. So we build the new school, deed land back to Mecklenburg County and make an investment in the park. Bruns, we're doing that right now with completely redeveloping Bruns and Wallace Pruitt. So there'll be a new rec center. We're connected to a park, which also has a greenway that runs through it. So there's another really good example, placing restrooms on the exterior of our building so that folks on Saturday who are walking the greenway trail have access to those restrooms. So we're thinking through all of those things in a micro level, and we're working through things in the future like Coolwood. The school is in a park. And so being able to redevelop that site today, because the tennis courts, for example, are right up on the school, which creates challenges for external users while school's in operation. But as we replan that site and build the new Coolwood Middle School, we'll make sure that the amenities that would be available to the public are accessible to the public and not hemmed in by the school use itself. We do have needs for a couple of school sites, including Berry Hill, which is down Dixie River Road over near Barrowick in that area. And it doesn't have access to water and sewer, and it's 2024. And that site will never have access to water and sewer. And Mecklenburg County does own land nearby that does have access to water and sewer. And so the ability to work on that. And as we build a new Allenbrook, because we can't build Allenbrook where it is today, under the rules that we have to build schools by, we actually couldn't build Allenbrook today. So we have to move it. So we're moving it across Freedom, which means that site becomes available for a park consideration. Villa Heights will replace Villa Heights off the site because we can't build a Villa Heights on that site. So we'll move that to the Hawthorne site. That allows that site to redevelop. Chantilly, we will be moving the program that's in Chantilly to Billingsville. there's not a way to build a school on Chantilly because of those challenges around wetlands and the stacking and queuing and all of the rules that we have to play by in order to build schools. So there's another opportunity for infill, touching a greenway. So we're really excited about trying to keep these lands in the public's hands and be able to leverage things that we have in order to address things that we need and keeping it all in the family.
Perfect. We're ready for questions. Perfect. Who wants to kick us off?
Wow. I can.
Please.
Okay. I have a lot of questions and, okay, just since you just talked about this, the schools that you're moving to another place and you said they're open for a park, is that already done? Do we pay for it? Cause don't we own it? And don't we have to approve that first?
So nothing's done. We've identified sites where there are those opportunities. And so we would look at, exchanging real estate would be basically the way that we would look towards making that happen. So
Can we do that? The whole first right of refusal and all that, like, why don't we purchase every school then if we can do that?
I don't know the dynamics of how the school charter works with the state and how they're funded and how they go about acquiring land. I do know that, as I said, since I've been at Park and Recreation, we've done land swaps and things along those lines with the goal of being no net loss of open space, trying to enhance the site so that it's available for park use and for educational use. So we're not reinventing the wheel here.
Okay.
and it's not about,
And then-
it's not about dollars changing hands. It's more about the real estate being able to change.
I think that's what I was asking you a while ago about there's a perception. It's very difficult to swap. And you told me, I think, that it is not as difficult as that perception.
I thought it was difficult too.
Well, one thing that I'm going to interject here, and Dennis can continue. There's been different leadership in CMS that's changed. And as the leadership has changed, there are different aspects in how you move forward with that, different protocols that we follow. Now with Dennis, as he just said, he's new in this role, looking at some of those things. And there probably are some legal things that may require some sort of different protocols as it relates to one entity providing the land to, like if CMS was, I don't think they can literally give land to Park and Recreation. There has to be some sort of quid pro quo, but how that's outlined and defined, I don't have that information here today.
Statutorily, the Board of Education is supposed to receive fair market value for any land
Right.
that it conveys, right?
Right.
But in doing that, you can do that through land. So if we trade 10 acres at $1 and that's 10 acres and we get it takes 15 acres to add up to $1, then it's a net swap. So it really comes down to just making sure the value's indexed based on an appraisal. And I think we're in a world where we're seeking less. And I don't think also the real estate that we are looking to acquire through exchange has some of the value of some of the other sites that we could actually potentially convey. So I think it's just a matter of working through all that, but it's not about getting to the dollars. It's about trying to figure out how we can put a school on a better site. And also when we're done with a site, not necessarily just going to the private market and selling it and then and then coming to you for right of first refusal and saying, okay, we have a deal to sell this thing. How do you feel about that? It's about being proactive up front and saying, we know we can't build here. We will not have a use for this site. Do you have an interest, Mecklenburg County? And so starting the conversation there. And if the county says we don't have an interest, then there's a different conversation to be had. But if the Park and Rec says, yes, there's an interest, then we go down the road exploring that.
Okay. Another question, Greg, I think you said the high schools have the booster clubs and, all of that with the high schools, right? But don't many middle schools also have PTA funds that go into their athletic fields? And are they allowed to push back and tell Park and Rec, no, we don't want community groups coming in like Dilworth Little League using AG Middle School? I think that used to be.
Well, I think that Dennis has reorganized his community use operations where now it used to be ran mostly by the principal was king, and that was the way it was.
Mhm.
And I think correct me if I'm wrong, lately we had a conversation about this, and what he has done is realigned his operation to where now everything runs through their office, his office. his team. And to where now they're getting a little bit where a lot of that's going away. I think also, you also have the opportunity now, some of these groups, these neighborhoods, like he's mentioned, a couple of them, where they were not allowed to go to these schools. And now we've kind of to join them as of right now, the quickest, the fastest way to get some relief in some areas. We just had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I've aligned them up with Dilworth Little League to actually start having conversations about 2 sites now to get that ball rolling. So now a lot of that before, the way it was done, as he mentioned, new leadership. Now what we've done is we've started taking some of the groups that we are at capacity at right now. We're saying, hey, we know there's some areas over here. We are putting them together right now as a quick, Band-Aid fix to get some things going on to maybe a potentially, as Bert just said earlier, maybe there's a bigger picture plan in the future. So the answer to your question is, a lot of that was happening before, and what's going on now is a lot of that, those barriers are being knocked down.
Okay.
And now we're having the ability to get them joined up to do something.
That's a great thing. And then, okay, I have other questions, but just one more. One more.
Then we want to go to.
Does county money, if a group does come in to use a middle school, does county money come with it to help, to maintain the fields at all?
What do you mean?
Like, is there a park and rec money that if there's a deal with, or there are a lot of entities, school, park and rec?
So generally speaking, if the deal is with Dilworth Little League, for example, it's on them to operate and
It's on
maintain
Dilworth
that.
Little
We're not
League.
looking for Park and Rec to
Okay.
maintain that.
All right.
Great, Mr. Rodriguez McDowell.
Oh, thank you. So I guess just piggybacking on what you're saying, I was trying to understand the so the athletic leagues sometimes use county parks, and then sometimes they use schools. And sometimes both, okay. So I guess I'm trying to understand the revenue stream or whatever. So I guess that is the basis of all of the umbrella agreements and stuff like that, is trying to see who's paying for what as far as maintenance goes. And so that just seems so complicated. Like, so are you doing it like this school is under a private agreement with this league, but this other school is under a park and rec agreement? I'm just trying to understand how is this, how is it
Well,
maintained?
For instance, what we do, if somebody wants to use one of our facilities, they can do one of 2 things. They can either rent it by the hour, come out there and just use as much as they want to do, or they can enter into an agreement with us. I'm talking about a private entity, a little league.
Okay.
And we can have a maintenance and operations agreement, and based on the amount of money that it costs us to rent a field and maintain a field, that's figured into their cost. And they may want to put in some investment in order to maintain it and keep it going. And that gives them a time period that they can use it. And it's usually over several years.
Okay.
Now, another way, they may want to go through, and I'd have to let Dennis chime in on that, to just lease some space, use space at the schools. I don't know if because of your community use, they would pay.
So it depends. So basically that agreement that Lee referenced for Park and Rec, that's what our extended use agreement is. So we'll do up to 3 years with somebody having priority scheduling if they agree to make a certain investment and maintain and operate that facility. So they're putting skin in the game in order to justify that. Otherwise, you're renting by the hour in essence, and that's what our community use is. And so that can be a 90-day agreement at a time. But again, you're the last in line from a priority standpoint. If you're doing community use at a joint use site, well, if CMS is the priority of that, it's CMS first, it's Mecklenburg County Park and Rec, and then it's the dates and times that are left for the community use person to plug in after that scheduling is done. And again, they've got to renew that contract every 90 days, and there's an application fee, and there are things that are tied to that. So for an organization that actually, is a going concern and has their stuff together, it makes more sense to pursue an extended use agreement or an operations maintenance agreement with Park and Rec, because they can know, all right, I have a defined period of time where I'm the priority person on this particular field in return for this investment that we're committing to make as an entity.
Okay, the concern that I'm, really wanting to get at is first of all, I really love the idea of joint use. I think it's a home run, for the community, that they aren't having to duplicate tax dollars to pay for, for having things just sitting there lying not used when they could be utilized. So I love that. But I'm trying to, I know I was just asked recently by a reporter about for-profit, uses like leagues that are making money. And, are they using our fields? And if so, or do they have their own private fields but I don't want to take up time for you to tell me a complicated answer. So that was just one of my concerns. I just want to lay that out there. Just to make sure that those for-profit entities are paying their fair share and not the public, subsidizing their use. So that's just one thing. And the second thing I had was a concern about artificial turf and the PFAS and are we in our schools and in our parks, are we thinking through whether we want artificial turf? I know it's cheaper for maintenance, but it's also could be really costly for the health of our children. I wonder if that's a topic that you guys are considering.
I can tell you from our perspective, I mean, we're always concerned about health. And we got a big scare several years ago as it related to crumb rubber being used on fields. And that may be something that was carcinogenic, and it particularly said it was affecting young women playing soccer, particularly the goalies. And so the federal government was going to do an exhaustive research on this and was going to get back to us within a couple of years. 4 years went by, never got any conclusive results back. But during that time period, the way the synthetic fuels are manufactured and the composite for the matrix of things other than crumb rubber has evolved to using more organic things, using coconut husk, using walnut shells, sawdust, things along those lines that make them safer. The whole benefit with synthetic turf fields is that you can get a lot more use out of it. Right now, what we're talking about is availability of field use. If you have grass fields everywhere, you get bad weather, somebody use them, it's just like rotating crops. They got to rest for a while and you won't be able to use them. So we try to keep a good balance with that, and the technology is going to keep on evolving. But the fields that we use, particularly, and the awards that we receive, Park and Recreation has received at American Legion Memorial Stadium and at the Sportsplex, for the best quality type of those fields in all areas in terms of environmentally sensitive, usability, and resilient, and meeting these safety standards. That's the direction that we go in.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to take up any more
Thank you.
time.
So we just have literally a few minutes left and want to be respectful of everyone's time. I do want to give space for Commissioner Kaiser, Commissioner Eggleston. Let me give you guys 1 minute and I'll give myself 1 minute and then we'll adjourn.
I don't have much. I think that was a good overview of good work that's taking place. I do think the middle schools, and you said it, as far as stretching tax dollars further, it is a zero-sum game, and any dollar that goes into an investment in schools can't go into something else and vice versa. So if you can increase the capacity in terms of that you have for the number of hours you can use fields or sites in this county more quickly, with the example of, can you light a middle school field? Well, you can put lights up at an existing middle school field a lot faster than you can find a site to build a new facility and get that online. It also is far more cost effective. So again, this was not a novel idea when we brought this topic up. It's something that, as Mr. Jones said, has been going on for a long period of time. We just saw opportunities to increase the amount of partnership, to increase the capacity that you have for youth in this community to recreate and as was said, not just increasing the number of fields, but making sure that geographically we're meeting the needs where there is oversubscription currently. So again, applaud all the work that's being done and think there's more opportunity to do more of it and want to make sure that was on y'all's radar and priority list.
The light deal is a big deal because you can increase the usage of fields with lights, but it also requires possibly artificial turf without wearing them out. So there's a double whammy there. Neither one of them are cheap. But one of the things that I wanted to emphasize again is these guys all know what to do. I just don't know that the legal mechanism is moving forward quickly enough. Is that a nice way of putting it? I think we need to encourage those folks that are doing the agreements to get at it, is another way of putting it. Would you share that? You guys share that?
I'll tell myself as soon as I leave.
Yeah.
No, so
Anyway, money's always a problem, and I didn't know whether there was an issue anywhere about money that could, whether there's a staffing issue that could help encourage some of this work or not. Maybe y'all can tell me that. I don't know that it's that problem on the side of Park and Rec, but it's possible it's on the CMS side to help you out. Is there anything going on there?
Always.
yeah, I'm gonna let you guys take that offline. We're really at time. I do have a couple of data requests, please. So one, let me just say thank you to everyone. I thought this presentation and discussion was excellent. It was really insightful. A couple of things that I think the committee would be useful for this committee. Number one, when we talk about the 23 sites that are currently being used, can we see that where those sites are? And then Bert, I think you referenced another 18. Or that you were talking about in the future, can we see where those are? What I'm hoping is that the overlay shows that, or their priority equity areas, as you know, was discussed. So I think we need to see that. The second thing, to Kip's point, can we get an ETA with respect to whatever the legal process is to see, you know, what are we looking at? Are there any barriers? Are there actions? And I'd like to know if there are actions that the board has to take once it comes back. Like what will those actions be? Let's kind of get ahead of it. And you know, the process is the process, but ETA and understanding of actions. That was the data request, please. Finally, the last thing that I do want to Dennis, you raised a excellent point that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. Most folks think of Park and Rec only as spaces to rent and to use fields, but you all have a process as well to use those fields. So I think it would be really helpful. I don't know, we have a link on our site to say, hey, you can't use Park and Rec field, here's another option. But you know, I don't know if that's even, Mr. Director, a possibility, but I think it may be a good use for the community to understand that.
Know that makes it part of their DNA and conversations. I was just really speaking to just 24 hours ago, somebody who needed access to a track. And as we were identifying sites, we identified CMS sites as well. So it's just kind of part of our DNA that we recognize that you may need to leverage the other public amenity if ours is not available.
But the point that and I appreciate that, the point that I wanted to drive home, even visibility when people go to our website, so when they drill down on Park and Rec site, could there be a link that has an alternative to CMS landing page for renting a field or whatever the case may be? So just wanted to tee that up as a possibility. Maybe that may be useful to the community. I don't know what my colleagues think about that.
Yeah,
And
Yep.
so,
it's definitely something we can explore. I don't
Okay.
think it's not.
yeah, but again, thank you, everybody. I know we're over time. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All right, properly second, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.